Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pynakker, and I'm here with my good friend, oh my goodness, my good friend, John Dehlin, who I've known almost since the beginning of my channel. He's wearing his BYU Cougar hat, and I'm wearing my Smith Rigged in 44 hat. So we're fanboys, right?
Go Cougars.
Go Cougars. And honestly, I tell people, I said, America might have been a much better place if Joseph Smith got elected in 1844. We might have avoided a civil war.
Maybe,
Yeah, I
maybe
don't know.
stranger things have happened.
Exactly, precisely. And I think that's the important thing to have this conversation. So a few weeks ago, I approached John, actually before the Charlie Kirk thing happened. And I said, John, I've been wanting to do a video with you about what John Dehlin likes about Mormonism. And you were like, immediately, yes, let's do it. And then the day after the tragic shooting of Charlie Kirk, and unfortunately, there were some very reckless people out there that are trying to pin this on Mormons, taking out probably one of the most visible evangelicals in the world. And I was like, man, we got to nip this in the bud. And we actually talked on the phone that next day. And then I talked with Jacob Hansen after that on the phone and had some really positive conversations about what can we do as people that have these platforms to bring the temperature down. I said, look, believe what you want, have your opinions, but just watch how you say it. I think that's so important. Don't try bring the heat down. Let's quit using inflammatory language. And again, literally, when you say Mormons are demonic, Mormons are worship another Jesus. Mormons, just all the number of things, or they worship Joseph Smith over Jesus. So that would motivate somebody. Oh, and Jesus, and Lucifer are brothers. When you're literally othering and demonizing people, that's enough. Like I tell people, it wasn't what was being said in the ex-Mormon space that this person was being influenced by. This individual, this shooter, was being influenced by the largest anti-Mormon segment by far, which is within the evangelical community. And so, as I was telling some TDMs earlier, I said, I feel it's my role to speak out in my community against a lot of the negative rhetoric. And really, this all started getting ramped up in the 70s and 80s during the countercult time, the Godmakers movie, as well as the Godmakers countercult, and what was the other thing? Oh, the Satanic Panic. And ever since the 80s, and you grew up in that world, John, where you saw what the rhetoric did, and I think, unfortunately, it's starting to manifest itself in the 19th century. My people and the Mormon people were literally killing each other. And I don't want to return to that. So I felt like I want to have a series of conversations I recently had with Colby Reddish and now with John. And I'm going to continue to just have conversations about what we can do about making this space a safer space, but also still be able to do our platforms and how it's our responsibility to bring the temperature down. Sorry, I didn't mean to do such a long intro, John, but was there anything you wanted to say about the events of the last few weeks?
Um, as you know, I did like 3 hours in a panel with Julie Hanks and Bishop Bo Burnham and Bishop Bo Euler and Janice Spangler about both the Charlie Kirk thing and the Michigan thing. So there's a lot to be said. I won't try and recap all that here, other than to say, of course, I think any form of violence is deplorable. Um, uh, we're all horrified by both of those events. Doesn't matter what political or social or religious ideology, we should all be anti-violence, and it's despicable. But just a close second to that is I think we should all not rush to blame or even draw conclusions on what might be the cause of violence. And, you mentioned kind of the Mark Driscoll evangelical wing trying to blame the violence on Mormons. Within our culture, there's just as much of an attempt by certain believing Mormon apologist influencers and just Mormon believers to try to make the claim that ex-Mormon or post-Mormon or even liberal Mormon influencers are the causes of the violence. Uh, um, and I just think that the thing I'm trying to learn and hopefully I'll bring this up many times during today's interview. We need to get comfortable with this idea of both and of there being many influences to any specific human behavior. So, there's a broader social political polarization that's happening that isn't any one party's fault, that's clearly at play. There's clearly the work of social media and short form TikTok, Instagram Reels, Reddit and Discord, and all the different social media channels that are clearly at play. There's economic stuff at play. There's and then there's the mental health of the people involved. I loved John Turner's take on the violence recently, and his take is you always have to start with the mental health and the decisions of the killer. That's always going to be where most of the fault lies. And you can't even blame guns. You can't even blame anything. It starts there. And then uh and then you have to acknowledge that there's always going to be 10 or 1,000 factors that influence any human decision. And then I just loved what the panel said yesterday, which is we all need to, maybe instead of rushing to blame others, and especially rushing to blame others in a way that just reflects our agenda. If you're Democrat, you blame Republicans or MAGA for violence. And if you're Republicans or MAGA, you blame woke leftists. What we all need to do is say, like you started out this podcast, what are we doing? What am I doing to contribute to polarization and tension? And so I'm absolutely reflecting on how has Mormon Stories contributed more heat than light? And how can I and Mormon Stories pivot to be more bridge builders, to be more peacemakers? And so instead of trying to point fingers at anyone, um, even though I'm disturbed by Mark Driscoll, honestly, I'm not going to blame Mark Driscoll for any violence. But also I'm going to look at how I'm contributing to things and see what I can do better. So I appreciate this invitation to discuss bridge building and peacemaking. I love it. Thank you.
Hey, John. And I just want you to tell me a little bit of what does this reflection look like? Because a lot of people say, listen, in in whether you agree with this or not, most people would say that you are in the upper echelon, if you will, the first presidency of the anti-Mormon, ex-Mormon movement. You may not consider yourself to be anti-Mormon, but people have put that label on you. And so they would say that maybe being opposed to stuff to the church and whatever, your channel's doing, that may contribute to this. And again, what kind of reflection have you done in thinking like, okay, what can I do, John Dehlin, what can we do as the Mormon Stories Foundation to make sure that our rhetoric is done in such a way that it doesn't influence a mentally ill person from taking shots at people?
Yeah. So from the very beginning of Mormon Stories, so I'll reflect live. I'll reflect in real time. Here's what I can say for sure. Number one is I started Mormon Stories, what I know for sure, with the intent of helping the church become healthier, helping the church become more honest, and helping people stay in the church. And if anyone who's watched Mormon Stories from the beginning, I think who's fair will draw that conclusion. So I'm interviewing Richard Bushman. I'm interviewing Terrell Gibbons. I'm interviewing Claudia Bushman. I'm interviewing, Dan Witherspoon, Patrick Mason. Like, pick any of the early faithful, thoughtful Mormons. I interviewed them. Adam Miller. Like,
Dan
pick your,
Peterson.
Jennifer Finlayson Fife. What?
Dan
Who?
Peterson. Dan Peterson.
Dan Peterson. Like,
Yep.
pick your faithful Mormon or author or apologist who's speaking today at Faith Matters or Restore. If they've been on the scene 5 years or longer, I was probably the first person to interview them. So I don't think anybody credible can argue with that. Now, as I as I continued being a podcaster in the Mormon space, I started to be inundated with the pain. I would see marriages dissolve over faith matters. I would see LGBT Mormons become depressed and suicidal. I would see lots of carnage from policies and doctrines that I don't think were intentional in the church to hurt anyone, but I was just constantly marinating in pain and suffering. And that does change you. It can make you angry. It can make you start to speak in passionate ways. So I will totally agree that my tone changed over time as I started going through my own anger and grieving. And then as I also was sitting with so many other people in pain. And then, of course, when the church excommunicated me, it did two things. It made it so a lot of those faithful peacemaking type people just wouldn't or couldn't come on the podcast anymore. So in some ways, that's by design. You demonize and excommunicate someone and make them an apostate. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that they'll become perceived as anti-Mormon, if for no other reason than that they've been labeled as apostates. But then less believers and church employees and people trying to navigate their capital will come on the show, and then just automatically the show is going to start. Plus, you make that person angry and hurt, um, and it's just going to happen. So, do I wish? Do I feel like I've been perfect in tone and fairness? No, of course not. Do I think I still have tried since my excommunication to continue interviewing believers and apologists and to be as fair as I can? Yes. And I am constantly, I have current stake presidents, current bishops, current missionaries, current church employees that are all telling me, thank you for how you conduct Mormon stories in 2025. Because you're fair and balanced, you make it so that I and others like me are comfortable watching. So I know that there are large groups of people that feel like I'm walking that line of being fair and of being balanced. Now, having said that, I still become caffeinated. John, sometimes I still get upset. And so I want to say, to some extent, I still stand by my basic approach. I think that a lot of the people that claim I'm anti-Mormon have never really watched Mormon stories in any depth. Um, because I don't think while I okay, so let me pivot. So can you criticize the church and not be anti-Mormon? Again, I like what John Turner said on my show last time I interviewed him. John Turner believes that it's a sign of respect to thoughtfully critique an organization. It means you take them seriously, and it means at some level you care about their well being. So as I'm reflecting, I have to, I believe in my core that to thoughtfully critique an organization you care about is a sign of respect and of love. And I will go on the record to say, I have deep love for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I have deep gratitude for the good that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has done for me and done for me in my life. And I have a deep love for the Mormon people. Uh, and if you ask me why I do what I do, it's to alleviate suffering, to help people in transition, find healing and growth, and to help the church improve. And I think the church has improved considerably over the past 20 years. And I absolutely believe that public internet criticism has contributed significantly to the church's positive growth and changes. So, uh, do I believe that you're anti-Mormon when you criticize? No, I think thoughtful, respectful criticism leads to positive change and is a sign of love and respect. And I think the proof is in the pudding. I would argue that the Mormon Church has never changed faster than in the past 10 to 15 years. In its history, it's never changed faster. And I think that's because of uh, respectful, thoughtful criticism and public exposure. Now, that's part of my reflection. The last thing I'll say is, do I get angry sometimes? Do I sometimes get snarky? Do I sometimes get sarcastic? Do I sometimes lack balance? Yes, 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 yes. And so what does that mean? That means I need to check myself, check my programming, check the people that I bring on, check the panelists that I bring on, and constantly reevaluate for how can I be more peacemaking? How can I be less snarky? How can I be less sarcastic? How can I have better co-hosts? And how can I have better guests that don't contribute to the heat and the acrimony? And I can say that even over the past 5 years, I believe that Mormon Stories has become less acrimonious, less sarcastic, more compassionate, and more fair and balanced and less caffeinated. But we have a long way to go. So this panel that I've started pulling together, I'm calling it the Mormon Peacemakers. It's me, Bishop Bo Burnham, Julie D'Azevedo Hanks, and Janice Spangler. We've now done 2 episodes, and I stand by the 2 episodes of Mormon Peacemaking or Mormon Peacemakers as some of the greatest work we've ever done in compassionate, thoughtful, fair, and balanced discourse around Mormonism. And I challenge any critic of me, anyone who wants to call me anti-Mormon, to pull up those 2 episodes, the one on an inconvenient faith and the one that we just did on Charlie Kirk and the Michigan murders. Pull those up, critique them, and give them a fair response. And you tell me whether we're being fair and balanced, whether we're being compassionate and thoughtful, and whether you think they're anti-Mormon. And let's have a conversation. And let's have a conversation on Mormon Book Review. You know what I mean? If we have to, because I want to enter into dialogue with people if they're willing to have a basic level of respect, of kindness, of listening, and of bidirectional communication.
I love it. And actually I had experience with you a few years ago. This is early days, and I think I was just getting started, and we had a telephone conversation, and then you asked me a question about a particular individual and something they said, and then 20 minutes later you turned the camera on and you were very upset at the time and you expressed that. And then the next day you walked it back. Um, what kind of, when you say like, how do you balance this? On one hand, it's great, like, hey, I have this platform at any moment, I can just turn on the microphone and say what I want to say. But then at the same time, do you have like just people around you that kind of say, John, don't do it, sleep on it? I mean, do you have people in your life that are keep you from caffeinated John from turning on that microphone?
Yeah, right. Right. One of the best things that's ever happened in Mormon Stories is my wife Margie getting more involved. Margie is a very private, but a very thoughtful and a very fair and balanced and um, uh, just a very mindful human. And if you'll notice, it maybe 5, 10 years ago, as soon as the Charlie Kirk stuff would have happened, I would have been streaming about it the same day. I waited at least a couple weeks, maybe 3, before I even waded in. And same with the Michigan stuff. I guess I would say that Margie's influence has been helpful there, but it's not just Margie. I listen to my audience. Like I what I did is I went onto my Instagram and my YouTube channels and I just said, "Hey viewers and listeners, what are your thoughts on weighing in on the Charlie Kirk thing?" And I would say at least 40% of my audience said, "Don't do it, John. Don't get political, or you don't, there's not enough info yet. Wait till there's more information." And, between my own instincts, Margie's counsel, close friends that I have, and my own audience, better heads prevailed. And I feel really good about the episode we just dropped about Charlie Kirk and the Michigan stuff. And, it's hard, as you know, it's hard as a creator, especially someone that there's always a pull to break stories. You and I have had conversations about the urge to want to be the first to break a story.
Mhm.
It's really hard to see you or Rebecca Biblioteca or RFM or Bill Reel or whoever break a story before you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with people breaking immediate stories. Don't get me wrong.
Right, right.
But when it's a polarizing environment where it's easy to get too excited and then to say hurtful things,
Yeah.
I think more and more I want to be someone that waits.
Hmm.
Same with an inconvenient faith. I was not the first to discuss an inconvenient faith, and probably lost some views by waiting a week or two to discuss it. But I'm really happy with the conversation we had. And so, yes, Margie, other close friends, including you, and my own community, more and more have all been really helpful in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's really good because, it's you have to weigh that like, okay, what, as on a platform, like people want to hear what you have to say. And then you need to balance it though and try and say, okay, am I doing this for clicks or am I doing this trying to help push the conversation in a more positive direction? I think one of the things that I'm most proud of when this whole thing happened was early on, the shooter was inadvertently tied into a evangelical church in Burton, Michigan. There was Detroit. It was said by the Detroit Free Press that he attended this particular church. It was inadvertent. What happened was sloppy journalism, to say the least. But first thing I did was when I had a pastor call me and tell me, Steve, it looks like it might be from somebody at our camp, and I said, I just called the church, and within 5 minutes, the pastor's on the phone, and he called me right back. And he said was never a member of this church, as far as well, it was never even attended. We have nothing to do with this. I said, I said, is it okay if I put this out there? So I put out the statement from the church on my Facebook page, and also put out a short. And you don't know, maybe somebody was getting in their car with guns to shoot up the place, and maybe that word got out there. This church had nothing to do with that. I think that's being positive, in contributing to trying to bring the heat down. And again, I just talked with that pastor for like 20 minutes. I said, listen, there's this 200-year tension that's been between our communities for a long time. And we were killing each other, like I said earlier, in the 19th century. And I don't want that same spirit to return, because that was, look, I think I'm not trying to demonize anybody, but if we can call anything demonic, it's the use of violence to silence the other. And so I think that's why there's so much tension here, and I just don't want people taking pot shots at the other side. And I've had some fabulous people that I've talked to that have been doing some great research and great background work on this whole story, and was able to be informed by the wonderful research, especially by Evan Charley, who is just a real asset in this community. And I want to thank her very much for the work that she does. I think she's lovely. Unfortunately, I was not able to address the Reformed Mormonism General Conference this weekend, but I just want to give a shout out to Evan. You are a wonderful friend, and the work that you did and the thoughtful work that you did was tremendous. I also want to thank my friend Dr. Kyle Bashirs, a fellow evangelical who is going to be is going to be releasing 3 books in the next couple of years by evangelical publishers that are it's going to reboot and reframe the conversation between our communities. The Walter Martin 1980s countercult garbage is no longer useful in this space. And so we're trying to move the dialogue in a more positive direction. That's been the mission of this channel since the very beginning. And so I just want to thank everybody out there who are, like Mr. Rogers, who is, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the greatest Christians of the 20th century. He said, look for the helpers. This is the time where we need to have helpers in our community. And I hope that we all can be helpers. Anything that you'd like to say about that, John?
Yeah, yeah. What I want to say is, and Stephen Pynakker, like, I hate the fact that the people that get the most, the way the algorithms work is that the people who generate the most contention, the most anger, the most hatred are often the ones that are the most popular. And you know, some would say, well, John Dehlin and Mormon Stories are the beneficiaries of that. I, you know, maybe, but what I wish is that Stephen Pynakker and Mormon Book Review had 300,000 or more subscribers, because I really do think you're evidence based, you're facts based, you're fair, and you're a peacemaker and you're a bridge builder. And so that's why when you say come on my show, I'm like, absolutely, I'm going to support Stephen, because who is able to broker uh conversations between opposing sides in a fair and balanced way? Who is more committed to balanced bridge building and peacemaking than Stephen Pynakker and the Mormon Book Review? So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the kind words. So, a couple of years ago, I actually interviewed you in your studio, and you gave John Dehlin's thoughts on Christianity. And I really felt like, but also it was really positive in that you also wanted to talk about, President Nelson at the time when they just did the temple changes and that they were putting Jesus more front and center in the temple ceremony. Um, I just want you to kind of reflect on, because there's not lot of places where you can have this conversation on your platform, nor are there a lot of platforms that would want to have this conversation with John Dehlin, but we're going to have it here. And that is, what is John Dehlin like about Mormonism? What positive impacts did it have on you? I know you've spoken highly of your mission experience, and what it did for your character. I just want you to talk about the good things about your time in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And there was last year I got a phone call from a very popular Mormon apologist who said I did 180 degrees on John Dehlin. And this is one of the big boys out there, and you've been in conversation with him. He said, I don't think John Dehlin hates the church. I think he loves the church and he wants to reform the church. This is coming from a pretty conservative apologist in the Mormon community. And I just told him, I said, thank you, sir. I said, that's what I've been trying to tell people for years. But they've so demonized you. And I do think you have a heart for the people of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint. And so I just want you to kind of share some of the positive things of the church, that have affected your life, and maybe even like you said, over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen more changes in the church than ever before.
I love it. I love this. I love this topic. So I have to be, I have to begin with a disclaimer that I wish I didn't have to give, but I do have to give it. And here's the disclaimer. I can talk all day long. I can talk for weeks and months on all the things I love about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Mormonism and the Mormon people. And I would be happy to. What I'm reminded by people that have been harmed by the church is that it can be experienced as very invalidating and painful and even traumatizing when someone with my stature, with someone with my knowledge and experience, just speaks glowingly about the church without acknowledging the ways that it has also been harmful. So I'll give you, a quick example. I love the United States of America. I was a political science major. I love American history. I was a Republican for many, many decades. I was a Rush Limbaugh fan. I loved, George Will. And, for so many decades, I was a flag waving Republican. And then I hated, I grew to not appreciate the Gulf War. And the Gulf War turned me Democrat because I just felt like we didn't have good reasons to go into Iraq. And for me, war is the most evil of all things. So the war turned me Democrat, and then I've been, I've voted Democrat for a couple decades. But I can talk all day long about what I love about America still, and the Constitution and the founders. And I also can talk for some time about the way America has done harm, like in Latin America, destabilizing governments and propping up dictators, and good and bad, Jim Crow laws and structural racism, and I could do both sides. And so before I get into all the things that I love about Mormonism, I just want to say that part of the reason I'm able to speak so glowingly about the Mormon Church is because, and this may be a word that is off-putting for some people, I don't know of a better word to use than privilege. I was raised in the Mormon Church as a white, straight, tall Mormon male of pioneer ancestry. And so it's just very obvious that the church was made by and for primarily people like me. And so there's a lot of pain and harm that I did not experience as a Mormon, that makes it so I don't bear the scars and the trauma that other people experience. I've never been sexually abused in the church context in a way where the church may have covered that up. I've never been black in a church that made black people a second class citizen. I've never been a woman in a church where the church, sometimes discouraged education and made women, disempowered women. I've never been gay in a church where gay people were encouraged to be celibate and to engage in mixed orientation marriage or conversion therapy. And the list goes on and on and on. So let me start by just saying that, and because I never want the positive things that I do say to be experienced as invalidating to the people that have experienced real harm and pain in the church. So I feel bad that I have to start out kind of on a sour note. That wasn't to like give a backhanded set of comments to the church. It's just acknowledging the real pain that many people have experienced. And I would do it with America. I would do it about my own parenting. I would do it about my own performance as a husband. Like nothing gets off scot-free. Everyone, both and every organization and every person has good and bad, almost everyone. And so forgive me for that. I want to pause there. Is there anything you want to say? And are you mad that I had to go there? Are
No,
you off
no, and
put
actually,
that
I'm
I had
glad
to
you
go
give me
there?
this opportunity because I do want to give people this perspective too. That I was an atheist for 13 years, and so I went through a full deconstruction process. And I was an atheist for a long time. And during this time, I was watching Mormon stories primarily as an atheist and felt that was very helpful for me. Um, and spent a lot of time in the ex-Mormon Reddit because I felt like there was a lot of things that I could resonate because I experienced some, spiritual and religious abuse and PTSD that I was dealing with. And so it was helpful and therapeutic. I remember when I first started entering in these spaces where I would be talking to ex-Mormons and I would be like talking about like being like a fanboy about Mormonism and realizing I'm triggering these people. I got to shut my mouth. So I want to acknowledge that too. And and I also think it's really important because, like I tell people, said, 25 years ago, most Latter-day Saints didn't know somebody that left the church. Now every Latter-day Saint knows somebody that left the church. So now we're not just talking about a theoretical thing. And many of these people who are faithful Latter-day Saints may even blame you, John, for their family members leaving the church. So I think it's important that we acknowledge this, that there's a lot of pain on all sides here and a lot of hurt people. And so I think it's important to acknowledge the people that have been hurt in all throughout this whole endeavor. I think we all kind of need to look in the mirror and say, like, even people on the ex-Mormon Reddit, maybe you need to be a little careful about how you say things. Bring the temperature down. I've talked to people that said, the ex-Mormon Reddit can be a very toxic place at times, and that toxicity can also create some really angry things that could cause set people off. So I think it's really important that we bring the temperature down across the board. But I also think it's important that we also acknowledge, I was talking to somebody on the phone today. I said, listen, I wouldn't be the person that I am if it wasn't for Joseph Smith. I wouldn't be the person I am because of the Book of Mormon. I literally went on your program. Part five was how Mormonism saved an evangelical's life. So I think it's okay to have a complicated relationship because with your faith or whatever, it's life is complicated. It isn't that simple. And so I think, and to your credit, you had me come on your program and basically talk about how much I love Mormonism as an outsider. So in many ways, you wouldn't be who you are if it wasn't for Joseph Smith. So
1,000%.
that's
1,000%.
important,
In
that we
fact,
talk about that.
let's talk about
Yeah.
how reading John Turner's book on Joseph Smith has helped give me a deeper appreciation and respect for Joseph Smith, because that's happening right now.
Wow.
We don't
Mhm.
have to start there. I'm just saying
Yeah, no, talk about
maybe
Joseph Smith. Yeah, let's talk about
let's
Joseph
not end
Smith.
without me going there.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well,
thank you for that. And
yeah.
yes, by the way, I'm just going to say, in 20 years of counseling tens of thousands of people, I challenge anyone to find one instance of me ever encouraging someone to leave the church, privately or publicly. It has never been my intention to get people out of the church. I get no joy out of people leaving the church. I don't, I'll say this now publicly. I've said it before. I do not have any desire for people to leave the church. And when people come to me and say, John, my beliefs are changing and I'm not sure if I can stay or go, this is my advice: stay in the church for as long as it's healthy for you to do so. And that is my advice, for probably all 2 decades I've been doing this, and that remains my advice in 2025. Stay in the LDS church as long as it's healthy for you to do so.
Mm. And I would say stay in the ex-Mormon space or in the atheist space as long as it's healthy for you to do so.
Yeah,
Because I
sure.
I think that there are people that spend too much time in their lives being angry at the church. And I'm like, man, you need to move on from this.
Yeah.
Because anger and hatred, I don't care what it is. What if you have hatred and anger in your heart, it's going to affect your soul.
Yep.
And so I think it's really important that look, I think it's a good way station sometimes to be in. Like, hey, but then there are times when people write in the ex-Mormon Reddit, they'll say, "My time is here is done. I'm able to move on now." And I think that that's really what we should look at it too. I've had ex-Mormons tell me, I said, I hate the church a lot less because of you, Steve, and your appreciation of the church and history. And I want to bring that, soften this area. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of people in a lot of different toxic spaces, whether it's in the Exmo space, whether it's in in certain sectors of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where there's a lot of oppression going on. And look, I witnessed it firsthand. I talked to people. There are issues happening in the church, okay, and there are just bad things happening. However, it shouldn't. It also is, but this can be said about any institution, in particular any religious institution. You can make the same critiques at. And so I think it's also important that we also broaden that out too, is that this isn't just something that's Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is something that's been happening to the churches for a while now. And I think the push for transparency in these institutions is a good thing. I think having people holding feet to the fire of the elites or people of leadership of any institution or any organization is a good thing. And I think it benefits the people in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I go to these ex-Mormons because ex-Mormons or anti-Mormons will go to me and say, why are you so friendly about the church? And I'm like, if I have an agenda, it's this. The church ain't going anywhere. And we need to
Amen.
acknowledge that.
Amen.
And so I'm sorry, ex-Mos or anti-Mos, you can't burn it down to the ground. That's a
Amen.
tilting
Amen.
at
In
wind.
fact, can I one up you here?
Yeah,
The more you fight the church, the stronger you make it.
agreed.
Like 5 to 10 years ago, I just had this realization. So, like for an example, I'll give you an example. Okay. So I hope my critics will listen to this episode. So there was, when I was at BYU, I watched the September 6th get excommunicated, and I learned about Von Brody's excommunication. And I just felt like this seems so wrong that honest historians who love the church and some who don't are getting silenced and excommunicated by the church when, for the most part, they're literally just telling the factual history or, trying to stick up for marginalized groups. So when I bought my microphone in 2005 and I started Mormon Stories podcast, of course, in my mind, I knew that excommunication was a likely outcome for Mormon Stories, but I had a naive hope that the church wouldn't excommunicate me. Well, to the church's credit, it took them 10 years to excommunicate me, but finally they did. And then they excommunicated several other people, Jeremy Runnels and Bill Reel and Sam Young and Natasha Helfer. And what I decided to do in each case was go to the media, go to the Wall Street Journal, go to the New York Times, make it a huge public embarrassment. When Bill Reel was excommunicated, I drove a van of people down to Bill Reel's excommunication, and we all hung out in the parking lot and did a vigil for Bill. When Natasha, same thing. I went to Natasha, Kansas, big vigil. Sam Young, same thing. Flew to Houston, big old vigil. Jeremy had a vigil. Vigil, 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 public exposure. Guess what happened? Over time, the church slowed down its excommunication of critics. And eventually it even changed. It got rid of the term excommunication and it slowed down doing it to the point now where Charlie Bird is still, as far as I know, Charlie Bird and his husband are same-sex married and Mormons in good standing. And part of that is because the church now knows that when it excommunicates people, it is going to pay a big public price and it's going to look like a barbaric medieval institution and it's going to get really bad press. So over time, the church changed and got better. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, I just spent hours and days and years of my life. And what was the result? The church got better. That was the end result of all my efforts is I made the church better. And then I thought, oh my gosh. And then again, with the gospel topics essays, I'm interviewing Grant Palmer, I'm interviewing Michael Quinn, I'm interviewing Dan Vogel, I'm interviewing Hans Matson, I'm interviewing Greg Prince. What happens? What happens? The church eventually comes out with the gospel topics essays. I'm not saying that I'm responsible for the changes in the disciplinary council stuff. I'm not saying that I'm solely responsible for the gospel topics essays, but I'm pretty sure I was a factor in that decision. And after a decade of spotlighting truthful Mormon church history, what was the result? Along with a lot of other people's efforts, and I could list them, but I won't for the sake of time, the church became more transparent and honest in its history. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what is the net result of what we're doing? We're making the church healthier and more honest and transparent. Same with Sam Young. Sam Young's like, stop interviewing children alone. Stop the one-on-one interviews with children. Within months, the church starts creating policies allowing parents to be in one-on-one interviews with their children. And I just thought that's what we're doing. And so I sat with that and I thought, wow, if I hate the church, and I'll say this to any of my critics, if I hated the church, the number one thing I would do would be to shut down Mormon Stories and stop it. Because that would be a major source of sunlight and spotlight and of feedback that the church no longer would be receiving. And so why did I continue? Tell me, if I realized 10 years ago that the net effect of what I was doing was strengthening and helping the church, why did I keep doing it? It's because I love the Mormon people And I love the Mormon church, the LDS church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it makes me happy to see the church improve. It makes me happy to see the Restore Faith Matters movement. Because guess what? I created the Mormon Matters podcast with Dan Witherspoon. I asked him to lead that. I created the A Thoughtful Faith podcast, first with some other people that are no longer around, and then with Gina Colvin. I started the Stay LDS website, and I started the A Thoughtful Faith Facebook group that turned into Waters of Mormon. I still own I still own the Stay LDS website. I still support it. I leave it up. And so when I see Faith Matters and Restore, I celebrate it because I think that's extremely positive to have voices like Patrick Mason, Terrell and Fiona Gibbons, Thomas McConkey, Adam Miller. I could go on and on and on. Jennifer Finlayson Fife. These are wise, good-hearted people who have significant influence. Now, am I taking credit for Restore and Faith Matters? No. Do I think like I helped pave the way? Did I help make Terrell and Fiona Gibbons a household name? Yes. Did I help make Thomas McConkey a household name? Yes. Did I help make Greg Prince and Patrick Mason a little bit become more well known? Yes. Adam Miller? Yes. And I'm happy about what's come about as a result of that. So anyway, I don't remember what got me here, but what I'm just going to say is when I look at Jasmine Rapalai now and just this latest podcast that's been launched called Informed Saints, I am so happy. I think Jasmine is intelligent. I think Jasmine is funny. I think she's witty. I think she's not mean-spirited. And I think she's a very positive force for the Mormon people. And guess what? She replaces a lot of unpleasant, sharp-elbowed, cantankerous, unhealthy Mormon apologists that used to occupy that space. Guess who I think was at least partially helpful in transforming Mormon apologetics into a more pastoral, a more honest, a less ad hominem based endeavor? I think we helped with that. Am I proud of that? Yes. I celebrate Jasmine Rapalai and Informed Saints and Restore and Faith Matters. I think the church is so healthier in 2025 than it was 20 years ago. And I just want to see it keep moving in that direction. Because do I think Russell M. Nelson has made the church healthier? Absolutely. Bless you, Russell M. Nelson, for making the church more kind to women, more kind to LGBT people, more inclusive of Black people, more celebratory of people of color, more honest and open and transparent in its history, and most importantly, more Christ-like and more Christ-centered. Who in the history of the Mormon Church has made the church more Christ-like than Russell M. Nelson? To the point where in this general conference, I would be willing to guess that Joseph Smith's name was mentioned less per hour than possibly any other general conference. And it's not that I hate Joseph Smith. It's just like I think we're all in agreement that the more Christ-like anyone or any institution is, including myself and Mormon Stories, the more Christ-like, the better. And praise be the administration of Russell M. Nelson for how Christ-like he, moved and managed and directed the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, yeah, and those very reflective of comments you've been saying to me in the past, and I think that's really important that people hear these things from you, because I think that you do look at yourself as somebody who wants to help the church. In many ways, John, in 2025, if a young couple went to you and say, where would be a good church to raise our children? Would you recommend the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be one of those places?
I mean, okay, so I'm gonna do my disclaimer because
Please do.
if that kid happens to become transgender, if that kid happens to become gay or lesbian, if that kid happens to become a feminist who wants to, really pursue education and get a career outside the home, depending on the leaders, the local leaders that they endeavor, and depending on the household in which that kid is raised, mileage may vary. So I'm not going to just give this blanket, everyone's going to be better off being raised in the church. Having said that, if you can have healthy parents, if you can have healthy leadership, I think that there are scenarios where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is among the healthiest churches in the world to raise the right types of children.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear you say that because I think it's important that, I had a very prominent individual come to me say that they had been doing work for decades in the Utah area, and I'm not going to give too much information other than to say this individual said, one of my biggest regrets is that there's not a single church in Utah that I could recommend a average viewer of Mormon stories to watch. And so I feel like it saddens me that even within the evangelical community, there aren't maybe safe spaces for the very same people that you also talked about as well. So I think we all need to acknowledge this on both sides as well and be more compassionate towards those who are different than us and have look, I'm very sensitive in this whole subject as well, and I think it's important that we address that, there aren't a whole lot of alternatives for those families, but perhaps one day it will be a great alternative. And I tell people, I said, for the most part, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a great place to raise his family. It just is, and I see it, and it's very. I love the people. I spend time with them, and it's an awesome group of people and an awesome experience just being able to be part of the restoration. I remember a couple years ago, I was talking with David Boyce before he jumped over from Team Protestant to Team to Team Restoration. But I said, David, one of the advantages we have over the haters or the evangelical critics of the Restoration, I said, we get to see the pearls of the Restoration. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. So there's a lot of good that you get exposed to if you're being a bridge builder, if you're being a peacemaker, if you're being somebody who wants to willingly engage people in a positive way without an agenda of trying to, dissuade them of their faith or proselytize them, tell them they're going to hell. I think we can have much more positive conversations in that space as well. What do you say to that, John?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to minimize it's kind of a mileage may vary thing. The church can also do great harm, like any organization.
Any organization. Absolutely.
Secularism can do great harm. Democrats can do great harm.
Mhm.
Republicans can do great harm. Corporations can do great harm. Democracies can do great harm. Autocracies can do great harm. The Mormon church can do great harm. And this is the both and again. And the Mormon church can raise incredibly kind and good human beings and can provide a super healthy and positive upbringing and a great life. And honestly, if I were forced, if God were to come to me and say, you have to, you're 20, you're 20 years old again, and you have, 4 children, and you have to pick a church to raise your kids in, uh, with certain disclaimers, I would have a hard time picking any other church than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it would be with a lot of care for the populations I've already described.
And I think that's important too. I mean, I think now that the internet's out and now that we're in the internet world and a lot of information's out there, I think we can start having more of these conversations. You are not an unknown person. Matter of fact, I went to a psychiatrist for a couple sessions last year when I was having my hearing loss issues in my ear. And I just happened to talk what I did. And he said, "Oh, and your name came up." He's like, "Oh yeah, I know John Dehlin's name very well because a lot of my clients talk about you here in Florida." It's just
Oh,
it's so I think there's a lot of therapists that probably know your name. And so I think, and that's, I think we do need to acknowledge, and that's actually one of the things I loved about an inconvenient faith was that it did talk, and I talked to Robert about what was your intent. And the intent was give people a reason to stay, but also have empathy for those who have chosen to leave. And I felt what a great approach that he took there. And I think we need more of those types of conversations that Robert Reynolds helped give us. And I'm pushing him to do some more work because I think it's an important voice in this space that where we can have peaceful coexistence, where we can understand why somebody left, or understand why somebody stayed, and be able to at least be mutually respectful of each other and having a much more civil dialogue.
absolutely.
So I know we've been a little over an hour now, and I just wanted to touch on a few other things. In the past, you've talked about how important your mission played a role in making you into the person that you are, and I would like for you maybe just to address that. But you also said let's kind of circle back to Joseph Smith because as you're reading the really, really good John G. Turner book on Joseph Smith, and he's a great guy. I've had some great dialogues with him, had him on. I think it's a really good book, and I think it's very helpful for people to get a better understanding of Joseph Smith. So maybe just talk a little bit about your mission experience, your journey, your new journey with Joseph Smith through John G. Turner's book, and then anything else you would like to say that's positive about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
So start with my mission. So so many great things about my mission. I went to Guatemala from 1988 to 1990. Learning a second language is a phenomenally valuable human experience. Uh, Learning a totally different foreign culture is an incredibly valuable learning experience. The independence, becoming independent at 19 and facing fears and doing hard and courageous things away from your family for a 2 year period. It's very formative in helping build strength and resilience. Um, all the communication skills that come about, leadership skills that come about as being a missionary. Um, yeah, I absolutely wish all of my children could have had the equivalent of a Mormon missionary experience. I ex-Mormons, since I've started working with them, have lamented that their children often can't have Mormon mission-like experiences. And it's definitely one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I was branch president twice on my mission. I opened up an area where I started from nothing, and within 4 months, there were 40 people attending our branch. There's another branch that had fallen into disrepair, and I was able to revive the branch from like 20 or 30 people to like 100, 120 people attending. Just like, how do you get those experiences anywhere else in the world? I also experienced really horrific corruption on my mission and ecclesiastical abuse, but I stood up to it and spoke out against it and was punished for that. And I learned a lot about organizations and leadership and corruption that made me a little bit less naive for the rest of my life, and made me more sympathetic to power and abuse and the marginalized. So I just can't say enough good about my mission, even though many would say it was incredibly traumatic and abusive in some ways. It was also life changing in more ways. It was far more life changing in a positive way than it was damaging and abusive. So uh, as long as somebody can avoid the abuse and the harm, and the mission is healthy for them, I all the time have missionaries reach out to me and say, John, I'm listening to Mormon stories. I don't really believe like I used to. I'm trying to decide if I should come home or not. my advice is always, hey, if you can stay on the mission and be healthy, stay on your mission. But that's with the disclaimer of if you can do it in a healthy way. So can't say enough good things about being a Mormon missionary.
Awesome. I love to hear that kind of stuff. I think it's important because it was very formative of the person that you became. And so you owe a lot to just learning how the world operates. And as a very young man, it's an invaluable experience. And, for the last few years, I've been had the privilege to encounter just about every Mormon missionary in my ward and spending time with them and just really it's been overall very positive, and they're all good young men. And I think for probably 90 to 95% of missionaries, it's probably a positive conversation and a positive experience. And there's others I've had, an individual on who suffer PTSD from his mission. I heard from a BYU professor who told me my son's in his 40s and he's still suffering PTSD from his mission. So we've had also had those conversations too. But I think we also have to look at overall it's a positive experience, and there are always going to be exceptions to that, and we need to acknowledge
Yeah.
them as well.
The
Um,
both and is I've had several people on Mormon stories that became suicidal on their missions.
mhm.
And so Mormon missionaries can be Mormon mission experiences can be terribly abusive and even to the point of suicidality. So it's mission presidents can be incredibly abusive as well. So um, I think all missionaries and parents of missionaries should pay very close attention to safety and health and abuse and be ready and willing to pull the ripcord at the first sign of abuse or mental health or physical health distress.
Yeah, I think that is so important, and yeah, I agree with you, John. And I've had individuals. Nathan Smith comes to mind. He was suicidal, had suicidal ideation in his mission, and so I think we do need to acknowledge that. So one of the most obviously, look, if there's no Joseph Smith, there's no restoration. There's no Book of Mormon. There's no John Dehlin. There's no uh, Utah as we know it. I mean, it's truly one of the most important figures in American history, period, full stop. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that, that he's had a major impact on millions and millions of people's lives. And for many of them would say it was a positive experience. Now, but Joseph, I always tell people, a lot of people don't like that this whole photo with Joseph Smith, but I say, look, Joseph Smith looked a lot like this guy in this picture. Whether this is a photograph of him or not, this is much more closer to the Joseph Smith that existed than the Ken doll image that the church had been, correlating us for like the last 50 years. And so I also like a very human Joseph Smith who had his flaws, but I also think he had a heart for souls. And he did care for people. And he put his neck out on the line for Native Americans in a way that others maybe weren't willing to do, in that he was willing to say that, they actually are part of a great, proud heritage that they need to reclaim. So he was radical in that sense. And so I think that in many ways, Joseph was a very he was a trendsetter. He was a pioneer in so many different ways. He was very radical in his thinking. He was a religious genius and was willing to. I mean, it's not easy to start a religion that's 200 years old. Most of them don't stick past last after the founding prophet. And so, just even from a secular standpoint, Joseph Smith was a remarkable man, warts and all.
Amen.
So, what do you think about him, John? You said you want to talk about Joseph Smith. So,
Okay, so
here's your chance.
here's my here's my take.
Good.
My modern 2025 take on Joseph Smith. So um I believe that humans have a core set of needs. They need identity. They need friendship. They need community. A lone wolf is a dead wolf. A lone monkey is a dead monkey. They need tribe. They need spirituality. They need a set of moral guidance, a set of moral structure. They need um, some sort of meaning to inform and energize their life, some sense of purpose of what direction that their life is going to go. They need support in raising children and in building a family, a strong family that protects and nurtures children. And they need some sort of resolution about the afterlife, whether it's hope for the afterlife or peace or resolution about the afterlife. Not everybody has all these needs all the time, and not everybody has all these needs at the same degree. There's absolutely variability on all those scores. However, on average, most humans have those needs that I just outlined. And those needs are very, very important to the human experience. So it's my opinion that humans have created religion as much as prophets have created religion. In fact, I no longer believe that, there's this model in the anti-religion community that a cult leader wants to get power, sex, and money. And so he creates this fake ideology and fake spirituality and fake religion so that he or she can get sex, money, and power. I think that's not how it most often works. The way I think it most often works is humans are constantly longing for all those things I just mentioned. And then people either are trying to figure out those things for themselves and they start coming up with ideas and organizations and structure, or people notice that there's that need and they decide they want to try and be a part of the solution. And so we as humans create prophets. We create cult leaders. We create spiritual leaders. They're a response to core human needs. So Joseph Smith didn't wake up and say, I'm going to fool a bunch of people today. I don't like farming. How do I get a bunch of sex, power, and money? No. Joseph Smith grew up seeing poverty, seeing death, seeing alcoholism, seeing family strife, seeing religious division, seeing meaninglessness, seeing immorality, seeing a lack of spirituality, seeing Christianity, being inspired by the teachings of Jesus, seeing good things happen, seeing churches bring meaning and purpose. That's how Joseph Smith grew up. And then Joseph Smith said, hey, I've got ideas. I think I think I can contribute to this discourse. I feel inspired to write about this stuff. And maybe even I can contribute positively in this regard. And I think the Book of Mormon is Joseph's first great attempt at trying to contribute to these core human needs by writing a history that took Christianity and tried to expand it and extend it and solve many of the problems that Christians were debating in the day. I think that's and yeah, again, address core human needs. That's what I think the Book of Mormon is. It's Joseph Smith's first attempt to meet the needs that I described in my previous diatribe. From there, the next natural step was to start a church. And again, not with the intention of sex, power, and money. There are many other easier, more efficient ways to get sex, power, money. Although I will say that I agree with L. Ron Hubbard that if you want to get really, really rich, religion is a great way to get really, really rich. Mm-hmm. But there are other ways to get sex, and there are other ways to get power. Anyway, so I think Joseph Smith started the Mormon Church with all the same motivations that he wrote the Book of Mormon. and with all the same motivations that any cult or church or religious leader or guru starts anything similarly. I think Joseph Smith was big hearted and well intended and a fundamental believer in God and Jesus and in Christianity. And he just wanted to try and do it better and help more people. That's my belief. And so he starts the church. And I will say that as someone who has spent a little bit of time trying to create community, I think I've spent 20 years trying to create community. There is nothing more difficult than creating community.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing more thankless, more painful, more tedious
Mm-hmm.
than trying to create community. And um and if you don't believe me, go do it. Go start a secular book club, start a podcast, start a Facebook group, start anything. Do it for a year, do it for 5 years, do it for 10 before you ever really feel like you can really, really judge a community leader of any sort. And then get back with me with your criticisms of any community leader, because it's the most painful, difficult, tedious, thankless job there is, let alone starting a church, right? So if somebody can create a church that gets into the thousands or the 10,000s and that um, transcends a city, that goes to multiple cities, that then transcends counties, that then transcends states, that then transcends countries, and that then outlives the life of the creator. It's not that cults or churches or religions can't become big and powerful and wealthy. They can. But that's how any church, any business, any podcast that becomes successful starts out with cult-like dynamics, with a charismatic leader that probably made big mistakes, that probably has problems with leadership or culture or transparency or financial impropriety or sexual transgression. Find me a successful corporation, government, church that at its founding doesn't have some sort of significant scandal. I can't find it. Apple Computer, Microsoft, the United States government, Catholic Church, I don't care. Find me an organization that got big, that got powerful, that got successful, that met fundamental core human needs, that didn't have significant cultural, operational, financial, or yes, sexual scandal. So at the end of the day, if you are to say that any organization that has a history of corruption or sexual scandal, um, shouldn't exist, what you're really saying is churches shouldn't exist, communities shouldn't exist, countries shouldn't exist, corporations shouldn't exist. Prove me wrong. Find me a successful multinational entity that doesn't have sexual, financial, or organizational corruption significantly in its history. I just haven't been able to find it. Or it died in the first year, or in the first 3 years, or in the first 5 years. So, I after trying to create community, that is not to excuse abuse. That is not to excuse sexual predation or financial corruption or a corporate abuse or ecclesiastical abuse or cultural abuse. All that stuff is horrific and wrong. And it's inextricably tied to the human experience, in my opinion. And I invite anyone to find me examples to the contrary. So So if you're going to say that an organization shouldn't exist if it had corruption, I would say you just don't believe in organizations, or you don't believe in community.
Yeah, yeah.
Community. So I denounce Joseph's sexual predation. I acknowledge and denounce Joseph Smith's sexual predation. I denounce any fraud that Joseph Smith committed where he deceived people. I denounce it. I denounce any violence, misogyny, racism, homophobia. I denounce it all. And I respect the community and the church that Joseph Smith created and that his successors built and grew. And just like the Catholic Church, just like evangelical Christianity, just like Judaism, just like Islam, just like Buddhism, just like America, like warts and all, they've harmed a lot of people and they've done a lot of good. And so I think Joseph Smith was incredibly resilient. I think he was big-hearted. I think he, at his core, loved people and wanted to do good. And I respect the people and the church and the churches that have grown out of what he did. Um, so I can go into more detail, but that's how I feel about Joseph Smith and the restoration.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, John. And I even, because the evangelical critics out there, I just go to them and say, listen, you can say everything you want about Joseph Smith, but that would not, within the context of believers and scripture, it would not disqualify him to being a prophet or a producer of scripture, because there are plenty of scoundrels that wrote the Bible.
How about yeah? How about let's do a modern example? Mark Driscoll's in the news, right? One of the best podcasts I've ever listened to was produced by who?
Christianity.
Christianity Today.
Yeah.
And what's the podcast? Mars Hill. And what's Mars Hill about? It's about this mega church that Mark Driscoll started in Seattle, where I used to live, grew to 15 to 20,000 people, and exploded in scandal. And ironically, miraculously, it wasn't sexual scandal.
Right. Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
financial and social and administrative and psychological scandal, but it imploded just the same. Nobody's got clean hands. Like it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And kudos to Mark Driscoll that he is resurfaced. I hope he becomes more kind and more compassionate and more Christ-like in his reemergence. But like evangelicals, you don't have clean hands. Ex-Mormons, you don't have clean hands. Like, do I believe that there's corruption and abuse in secular circles in and out of ex-Mormonism? Absolutely. Absolutely. Democrats, Republicans, Americans, Chinese, Russians, Africans, women, men, queer people, straight people, abuse everywhere, goodness everywhere. Welcome to humanity, right?
Yeah, I love that. Welcome to humanity. And I think that is the key thing is the othering. And I tell people, when I first started this endeavor, God placed me in a place in which I'm on one side, I'm with my people holding signs. And then across the street, there are other people holding signs against my people holding signs. And God told me, he pointed at those people across the street and he said, "See those people over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Just remind yourself, Steve, that they are fellow image bearers, fellow image bearers." And that to me has been the mantra. And that's why I'm not afraid to have you on my program. Look, I will probably lose subscribers for having you on my program. That will happen. I don't care. I lose subscribers when I have Jacob Hansen on. I lose subscribers when I have Bill Reel on. Um, and so I think it's more important to have this dialogue and let people know, because my audience went for the first 2 years of my channel, this was a Mormon stories audience. And then the script flipped and it became a church newsroom audience. It's become much more of a faithful audience. And I feel it's important that faithful Latter-day Saints, knowing that this is a safe space in which you're not going to be attacked and that your church and people are going to be honored. I also feel it's important that you hear a voice like John Dehlin's to get a better understanding where he's coming from. If you don't want to watch his program, that's fine, but at least watch this episode to get to know John a little better. I also invite feedback and pushback all the time here at MBR. It's always greatly appreciated. And constructive criticism, I'm always open for that as well. John, I want to thank you, first of all, for just being a good friend, a real good friend, a fellow image bearer, and an individual who I do think does have a heart for the Mormon people, does have a love for the institution of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and wants to bring reforms, which resonates with me because I come from a reformed background. And I think that the church should always be reforming and getting better for its people. And so, as long as I look, there are people in the ex-Mormon space that want to burn the whole thing down. You are not one of them. And you've never indicated that to me. I've had others say, I want to burn it to the ground. Not you, my friend. And I
No,
think that you're an important voice in this space. And I think that we need to, like I said, bring the temperature down. John Dehlin, I like to joke, people say see him as the core whore of Utah. I say that jokingly, but John is a image bearer, a human being, a lovely person, and a lovely friend. And I want to thank you so much for coming on Mormon Book Reviews today.
thanks, Stephen. And I'll just add that um, I, as I look around, let's just say the 20 years I've been doing Mormon stories, right? And all the truth claims issues I've covered now, all the scholars I've interviewed, all the social justice stuff that we've covered about the church, all the stories that we've helped tell. I'm very happy with the 10,000 plus hours that Mormon Stories has generated. And I'm very happy with the progress that the church has made. And I'm very happy with the broader ecosystem. I think Mormon apologetics is in the best place it's ever been. I think progressive liberal Mormonism is in the best place it's ever been. And I'm happy that there are ex-Mormon influencers out there doing their thing. I don't think anybody's perfect, but I'm really happy with the overall ecosystem. And if I had to stop today, I feel pretty good about where things are and the direction things are heading. I remember a time when ex-Mormonism was way more cantankerous and negative and acerbic. I don't want to name names, but there are people that were doing really horrible things that were very leading voices. And please don't jump to conclusions about who I'm talking about. My guess is most people don't even know who I'm talking about because I've been around a long time, and a lot of people fade relatively quickly. So please don't jump to conclusions about who I'm talking about. Chances are you don't know. But man, people that think I'm anti-Mormon haven't been paying attention very long and don't really understand how bad ex-Mormonism can be and how negative and acerbic uh, ex-Mormonism can be. And my point is I'm really happy with where things are, and I'm happy with what Mormon Stories has done. And so I'm really excited about pivoting now towards peacemaking, towards bridge building, and my subscribers will decline. The revenue that we bring in the Open Stories Foundation will decline. Subscribers will decline, and my relevance, my popularity, it will decline. I'm already now. There's already people more popular than me. I love, I'm friends with Alyssa Grenfell. I celebrate her success. Doesn't mean I agree with everything she does, and I think she's incredibly talented, and I admire a lot of the things that she does. Um, but I am super happy with people being way more successful than me now. I'm at peace with the decline, if that's the way things go. But I am excited about a pivot towards bridge building and peacemaking. And I just invite anyone who wants to give me feedback, like you said, anyone who wants to criticize me, most importantly, anyone who wants to engage in constructive, healthy, kind, listening, mutual exchange of constructive dialogue, I want to do it. Because what I want to do is see in the next 5 to 10 years, the Mormon culture writ large come together, because I think that's possible. And I think it's happening. And I may or may not be a part of that, because maybe there's too many people that will just say John's too evil, John's too bad, John's too anti-Mormon, whatever. I don't care. I think that the bridge building and the peacemaking in the future of the Mormon people is ripe for the development. And that's how I want to spend the majority of the rest of my time as an influencer. And I invite anyone who wants to join me in that, including including the people that hate me most. I would invite you to reach out, and as long as the conversation is kind and there's listening and it's respectful and it's in good faith, I'm here for it.
Okay, well, that's the offer that John is putting out there.
And thanks for modeling it, Steve Pynakker. You've been doing this longer than me in
Yeah.
that way. Bridge building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
think you actually have been bridge building longer than me.
That's crazy to think about that, but I think the impact that you've had on my life has been really substantial too, John. I spent many, many of those thousands of hours watching your program, and it helped me get through some dark times. And actually, we talked about how it was actually Dr. Christopher Thomas's appearance on Mormon Stories that kind of was what was at that pivot point that led me back into faith again. And
Chris
so
Thomas is one of the greatest humans I've ever met.
absolutely, bar none. He's a fantastic human, and I love him and appreciate him immensely. And so I do think that in many ways you've helped build a bridge for me to re-enter into my faith. And I want to thank you for that because I'll forever be grateful for you helping me in that journey. Without Mormon Stories, I would still probably be an angry atheist. That's the reality of the situation. So,
Yeah, and I don't mind. Anger is natural and healthy. So
mhm,
I don't care if you're an angry Christian, an angry
right.
Jew, an angry Mormon, an
But
angry Muslim.
not for the
Like,
rest of your life, though. It's okay to be
yes,
angry for a while, but you
yeah,
have to move on, John. That's
yes.
the key thing.
And so healthy, kind progression is what I'm all about. And that can happen in and out of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in and out of secularism, in and out of broader Christianity. Let's just all move towards healing and kindness and growth
Amen. I love it. Love it, folks. I
and
appreciate
truth and
and
truth.
that's the most important thing. T with a truth with a capital T.
I think kindness is more important than truth, but
Yeah.
truth is a close second.
Oh, okay. I'm with you on that. That's very important, John, and I do appreciate it. So, folks, love to hear your comments, what you have to say. I'm going to have links in the description for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. Couldn't do it without you. We do greatly appreciate it.
Give Stephen your money. Give Stephen
Now,
your money. He's worth it. Pay
okay.
him. Give him money. Support him.
Oh, see, I don't want to come across as a televangelist, so I always save that for the
That's
end.
why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for you. Donate to Mormon Book Review.
All right. Well, thank you,
Stephen
John.
deserves your support.
Well, thank you for the kind words. And remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.